go in with a set plan and a set price, but be willing to pivot and adjust according to the information and the feedback you're getting.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
I mean, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the intoxicating relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and our guest today is Annie Sarnblad, and this will be the most unique and possibly most interesting podcast I have ever recorded. So I only have one thing to tell you about Annie. She reads Microexpressions on faces. So first we're going to learn about this superpower of hers, and then we're going to see how to apply it to pricing. So welcome, Annie.
Thank you, Mark, for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Oh, I am too. Oh, I've had the privilege of watching Annie a couple times recently. She is one of the most amazing people I have ever met. So, Annie,
that's a lot coming from you.
First off, tell us, what is this skill that you have? I mean, I think of you as a human lie detector. I'm afraid to talk to you because you're watching my face, and
yeah, but you love it. Yeah. So yes, so I am a human lie detector. I am what is called a microexpressions expert. I can numerically code the 10,000 different muscle combinations in human expression. And I did go through a whole certification program to learn to do that. I believe that there are about 800 of us in the world that can do that at that level. I am not a mathematical thinker, ironically. I was abused as a kid, and I was obsessed with learning to recognize predatory behavior and getting a vocabulary to put words to justify what I kind of already knew in my gut through my intuition. So when I found out that it was science and that there was a way to prove what somebody was feeling by looking at the expressions and the movements of the changes of muscle movement and blood flow on their faces, I became obsessed with that. And then once I learned that was my vulnerability, obsessed with it on my chin. Yeah. I code my own face constantly. It's an affliction. I then had kids, and I actually learned to code on a higher level post having kids, but already when I had my children, I was focusing on facial expressions because I knew some of it. And I started working with them before they were verbal in recognizing facial expressions. It's our universal human language. We're all wired to read facial expressions. And we lose that ability as we start looking our parents in the eyes. When we do this, look me in the eyes when I'm talking to you, look me in the eyes. And we stop scanning the whole face, because that's what babies do, is that they scan the entire face to pick up, is this person happy or sad? The only time we revert to that as grownups is when we're going to lean in for a kiss. we revert to our primitive brain and we start going.
So when you talk to me, you're not looking me in the eyes?
Not very often. I mean, the first thing I will do is gauge your pupil size. I do that with every single person I talk to.
So wait. We're going to get to that a little bit later because I find that so frustrating.
Yeah, I know. You're like, don't tell me.
My listeners are almost all, let's say, pricing people, product people. I would bet most of us are very logically oriented.
Yep. And a lot of my clients are, yeah.
The first thing I'm going to tell you is, how do I know this isn't total BS?
Okay. So, I'll go through this. My gut response is to be really, really vulgar. You've hung around me enough at a couple of dinners and stuff to know that I have such a dirty mouth, and I could answer that question in 2 seconds, but I'm going to go through the more like scientific, responsible, grown-up way to say that. So first of all, the Museum of Science in Boston is a client of mine. this is all science, body language, choice of vocabulary, using qualifiers or not qualifiers, all the lie detection stuff that is not facial expression or change in blood flow, heart rate, that kind of thing. That varies from person to person, from individual. That body language is very vague. Lie detection can be very vague. Facial expressions is extremely scientific. Human beings are wired the same way. When we're scared, our hands get cold. Blood rushes down to our legs and our feet. When we're angry, it pumps into our arms and our fists so that we can fight, right? It rushes when we're scared. I skipped that part. It rushes down to your legs and your feet so you can run, so you can escape. When we're nervous, we sweat in our armpits, sometimes on our brow, on the palms of our hands. When we're sad, we human beings cry. This is not a cultural thing. It's not depending on, some people cry more than others, and some people even cry when we're angry or frustrated. Women tend to do that more than men. But there's a change in blood flow and muscle movement that is specific to every emotion that varies from one emotion to the other. And the facial expressions correspond with the emotion in the same way. So, for example, when I'm standing on stage, I show a picture of the Washington Monument, and I explain when human beings feel arousal, the blood flows to the middle of their bodies. This is true for both men and women. And in fact, an erection is the most concrete example of a specific emotion leading to a specific change in blood flow and muscle movement. We would not survive as a species were this not true. And in fact, the same is true for women. The blood flows down to our core when we're aroused. Arousal in the face is a dilation and a swelling of the pupils. And this has nothing to do with whether or not you're socialized this way. In fact, if you've never met another human being, if you are born blind, you make the same facial expressions to show the same emotions. It's like saying, you don't, because you're born in Mexico or India or Canada, men have erections when they're aroused. It's not some men do. I mean, unless you have a medical condition, and the erection corresponds with arousal, not with sadness, not with anger. And if it does, then you need to talk to somebody about my pay grade. That's another thing. That doesn't have to do with pricing. Right. But the pupil thing that we were talking about is that every time I sit down with another human being and I go into a high stakes meeting, whether it's a date, honestly, or whether it's a pricing negotiation, I'm going to see what size your pupils are in this lighting when we start talking. And I'm going to see at what point do they swell. And so this can be in a pitch, in a romantic pitch, but it can also be, so for example, I think I gave this example on stage many years ago. I sat down, I was doing strategic advisory. I worked with managing directors and CEOs for the bulk of my career for about 20 years, doing high stakes negotiation, dealing with strategy, dealing with some of the things that you do with pricing, but mostly dealing with complicated human politics in corporate environments with their boards, with their management teams, et cetera. And so I went into this one meeting that I was a client was going to hire me. And I leaned over and I said, "You're a good leader. I can make you a great leader." And his pupils went ding, and I tripled my price. I thought, oh, that's a lot of ego you have there. So yeah, and I did make him a great leader. He was very good at what he did. He needed a little bit of polishing, and he needed some strategy and some media training, basically.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to come back to pupils in just a moment.
It never gets old.
I know, but the point that I really want, that I found so fascinating, mm-hmm. is the fact that I don't have the ability to control whether or not I show these.
Yeah, that's the fun part. That's why we had such a good time at dinner. Because I kept poking and saying like slightly more outrageous things, and you're like, well, you can't tell. And I was like, that's worry. You're furrowing your brow. You're swallowing because you're feeling a little insecure, and now you puckered your chin because that makes you feel vulnerable. And you showed me your nostril shadows, which are right next to your nostrils. If you're watching us on video, which is good. Mm-hmm. You just kind of wrinkled that skin next that nasolabial furrow, which goes from the top of the nostrils down to the lip corners. you lifted that because you were a little uncomfortable, but you also find this really fun. So you raised your infraorbital triangles, basically your cheeks, the apples of your cheeks. And I could see that the skin underneath your lower eyelids is squishing out. So you really think this is fun. You're having a good time. And you kind of went, oh. And I said, yeah, that's worry and more vulnerability. And then you just laughed. And I said, it hurts less if you surrender. And you were like, okay, great.
That's the line. It hurts less if you surrender.
It's just so inappropriate in today's society.
It is.
Wrong on every level.
So I think one of the reasons I like you so much is because I gave in a long time ago and just said, look, I'm just going to be me. Right?
Yes,
Whatever
clearly.
is me is me.
Yeah.
Right.
And those are always my favorite people. Yeah. Because why would you want to be anybody? Everybody else is taken, or what's the saying?
Yeah, something like that. Something like
yeah.
that. So the story you told at the conference that we were at together was about the hot pot.
Yeah. Yes.
So go ahead.
The microexpression precedes the thought process. The muscle movement in our face comes before we process what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, what our emotion is. The muscle movement is a pivotal piece of our brain recognizing feeling and emotion. So I use the example, I put my coffee cup up here. It's actually just got water in it. But if you touch something really hot, you don't keep your hand on that pot or on that cup and say, oh my gosh, this is really hot. If I keep my fingers here, it's going to burn. No, we're programmed to respond faster to that. Our reptilian brain pulls the hand back really quickly and goes, what just, ow, the ouch, and the understanding of what happens in that feeling comes after the muscle twitch. And science has been able to prove that. And then the really fun part is, this is so terrible, that I'm going to stretch my face now. If I put a lot of Botox and I can't move my muscles, I lose my ability to process emotion. It impedes the whole flow. First comes the muscle movement, it sends a signal to the amygdala, and then we process it. So for people with advanced stages of Parkinson's, for example, or other facial paralysis, their family members will say, this person used to be really empathetic, but there's something off. They're not processing with me. And that's because we know that mirroring the facial movement, so making the expression yourself or mirroring the other person that you're talking to, which happens in any kind of face-to-face communication, it's why we communicate so much better and we feel understood face-to-face in a way that we don't when we're not face-to-face. So the muscle movement precedes the thought process. So even somebody like me that's hyper trained and thinks about this 24/7, I can't stop myself from making the microexpressions unless I change my thought patterns and think about something else.
Okay, so the single lesson that I have taken from you in all the times we've talked so far that is valuable and actionable for me, and that's probably just because I haven't figured out everything that you know, or I can't use everything you know. But the one thing that you've taught me that's actionable is I have always hated people saying smile. For the camera, I just can't do it. And the thing that I learned from you is the only way I can do it is if I put a happy thought in my brain.
Correct.
And feel happiness.
Correct. Or if they're a little bit more friendly, but it's like ordering someone to say, relax.
Relax.
Good luck with that. Relax. And it's nobody ever says relax and like, just relax. Everybody's like, relax. And I will tell you, it's like being a woman. That's what it feels like to be a woman, where people are just kind of ordering you to act in the way they feel would accommodate their needs and wants. And that's annoying. I mean, nobody's saying just smile. Nobody's ever felt cheerful when they get an order to smile. Try saying you look incredibly handsome today. Yeah, thank you. I do.
Yeah. And even if I wanted to take a selfie and I wanted to smile, I have to think a happy thought.
You have to think a happy thought. Yeah. Otherwise you can't fly in Peter Pan.
Selfies of myself.
Yes. No, I don't either. But I've gotten to like them more because I have teenage kids who just don't, they've kind of gone past the stage of trying to look pretty all the time. And they enjoy silly more than pretty. So once you understand people enjoy silly, then you can give in a little bit, but I don't like it either.
Nice. Okay. Now that we've at least introduced your capabilities, let's see if we can apply this to pricing.
Yes.
You've already told us the story about pupils.
Yep.
Now, here's the problem that I have. I've met you a bunch of times, and I couldn't even tell you what color your eyes are.
I can't either. I've got face. I'm partially face. I've got face blindness. It's so embarrassing. So I don't really even know what my kids look like. I don't even really know what I look like. I mean, I told my child, I told my oldest, who's almost 21, I told her the other day, I said, whenever you walk into a room, I'm like, dang, I did good. She said, what is wrong with you? And I said, you know what's wrong with me? I'm dyslexic and I can't remember what people look like. I exactly don't remember their eye color. I don't remember the shape of their brows. It's always been fascinating that people can do those sketch artists and recreate a face. And because I never understood, they must have a face in their brain as if they were looking. I could describe it if I have a picture right in front of me. I could tell a sketch artist what to write, but I don't have memory for static faces. And I have a client who I absolutely adore. And I finally had to tell him, and this is when I actually started talking about it. I said, I don't remember what you look like. And he said, what do you mean? This is your whole career. And I said, no, I have to watch you move. I know that you're all shifty and you move back and forth. As soon as you start doing that weird thing you do, I know exactly who it is. So I remember movement. And when I started to learn to code on a higher level, I went back to the boy who was in love with me when I was 14 years old, who I thought was a real player. And I see my eyes tending, that sadness, this skin right here on a diagonal, that sadness. And this is his face. And he would pucker his chin, and just that longing and sadness and heartbreak when he used to ask me out over and over again. And I would say no, because I loved him so much, but I was convinced that he didn't love me back. So I would say no. And so all these years that he kept asking me out, he had this heartbreak on his face, and I didn't recognize it as what it was. And so I remembered all these movements going back 30, 40 years, but I couldn't tell you what his eyebrows look like. I can just tell you the movements.
So I thought the fact that I couldn't see someone's eye color meant that I wasn't observant. But
I think it's a brain wiring.
You think it's a brain wiring? Okay, so you sit down with someone to negotiate or have a conversation.
Yeah.
Just want to know how they're going to respond to you. Do you consciously say to yourself, I'm going to look at this person's pupils? Yes,
the pupils I do look at, because that's something I have to get checked off my list. Everything else I do intuitively. I can't ever turn it off. It's like you don't have to remind yourself, okay, Annie's going to be speaking English. I better turn on my ears. Right? You just hear what I'm saying. We just start talking. The pupil dilation, because I don't have good memory for static visual images, I have to do that. That has to be a muscle memory thing that I remind myself to do. Okay, what size are your pupils now? I actually will see them swell in front of me, but it helps. Sometimes you're looking away and you look back and they've become swollen. They've dilated. And so I want to remember where they started, because some people just have naturally more dilated pupils. And it also depends on light. It depends on whether or not they're taking medication, all of those things. So that I do. But with any kind of other movement, I can see it even from the side. I mean, I really see it from my peripheral vision. And because it's so located on the face, so anything right next to the nostrils, that's going to be disgust. Chin, vulnerability. If I see the tendons of the neck jump, that's fear. So I'm poking. I start off with small talk, and I get a kind of a baseline, and I say a couple of things that are a little outrageous, a little surprising, I do a little play, and that gets me to understand your baseline. Also, I just think it's fun. I mean, so it's not a manipulative thing that I've learned to do to manipulate people. I've just found that if I'm totally myself, one, they relax, and two, I just like to play. So I get away with things that I wouldn't otherwise get away with. I also find that if I make myself a little bit dumber than I am, people can manage me better. Because I often think I'm the smartest person in the room. If I go in that way, I'm not very likable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I want to focus on pupils a lot.
Yeah.
But before we do that, an analogy that I often think of and especially with talking to you and your abilities to see these facial muscle movements all over the place, is I think to myself, if you showed me a whole bunch of apes, they look identical to me. But if you ask
until you get to know
apes,
them.
Exactly, right? Until you look at them a lot and you really get to know them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure the same is true with people who study orca whales. And,
Yes.
right, it just doesn't matter. They all look the same to me because I don't know.
Right.
And so I get this feeling that if we stepped back, we as in normal humans, step back and actually focused on these skills, then we could start to learn them.
Yes.
And the one skill that feels easiest to me, and I want to say that carefully, is watching the pupil size.
Well, because we're already looking in the eyes. And so that's really easy. But the first thing I teach my clients when I'm starting to teach the other facial expressions is you have to adjust your gaze. And so there are certain things you can see from the upper part of the face, but I find it easier just to shift your gaze down to the bottom half of the face. And you can see, so this is why we need to be looking at the video. If I tighten my lips, that's anger. If I pucker my chin, that's vulnerability, sadness. If I lift my nasolabial furrow, that's disgust. This is a knowing smile.
By the way, to the listeners, you guys have to go watch this. Just
You have to go watch
the disgust face.
The disgust face is amazing. I turn into a totally different human, right?
You do.
But all of those different facial expressions, this is fear. Fear is the only one that makes the lower lip turn into a rectangular shape. And so if it's a rectangular, if it's a pull out towards the shoulder from one lip corner down and towards the shoulder, that's always fear, or what I like to call the oh crap face. Oh crap, shit's going down. It's not good. And all of those things are so relevant. So when I go into a pitch and I'm talking about the value that I offer my clients, obviously I first try to connect with them. I try to make them laugh. I get their baseline. I try to get that emotional warmth. Then when I'm talking about what I do, I'm watching how they respond, and I am always ready to pivot. So if I see the pupil dilation, that means I stay on that subject. If I see the disgust, which I talked to you earlier about, I just see that as the no face. No, 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 no. So I'm either going to dig deeper depending on the talk. If it's somebody that I'm trying to get a deal done through, I'm not going to dig right then. I'm going to go on to the next subject and see if I can get a more positive response. With a child or a teenager, you might want to dig and figure out what's really wrong. If you're saying, next weekend, we're going to go up to my sister, spend the weekend with my sister. I don't have a sister, but, and they're showing the no face. I'm going to ask, did you have something planned? What's going on? In my family, we'll just say, you're showing disgust. I'll say, oh, well, because we skip all the stuff. We're like, that's disgust and contempt. What's going on?
Nice. So one of the things that we didn't cover in the beginning of the podcast today is you taught your kids how to do this.
Yeah, that was my goal with learning to do this was to keep my children safe. That's, that is my focus and my obsession. And I didn't tell other people. I had about four people in the world that knew that I did this for a very, very, very long time. And I just used it in my strategic. I would walk into a boardroom with a client and they'd introduce me as an associate, or, this is Annie, she's doing some advisory work. I said she could join us. She's here anyway, kind of thing. They would dismiss me because I was a woman. And then I would code the whole boardroom and I'd say, okay, these two are sleeping together. Those two hate what you're saying. This one's dumb as a rock, but super, super loyal. If you just get that person to, that's really rude, but if you get that person to focus on the right thing, you're golden. But this person could be, understands your strategy, buys into your strategy, but wants to undermine you at every cost. So I could do that political landscape. And then with that knowledge, I talk to my clients about getting the assessment right, getting the full understanding. The microexpression shows us what's really going on under the surface. So if we're building strategy, we can have incredibly intelligent, high-level strategic brains and know the business, know the industry, know the players. But if we're not understanding how the players are interacting with each other, what their primary motivations are, what's the in it for them whole thing, if we don't understand what's under the surface, we're basing our strategy on the wrong things. You get the assessment right, it doesn't you get the assessment right, you can get the strategy right. But you get the assessment wrong, doesn't matter how good your strategy is if you're trying to solve the wrong problems.
Oh, God, you have the superpower that I wish I had, right? Which is why I find you so fascinating.
It seems like a great idea, and then until your teenagers start coding you, and then you're like,
Yes.
oh, dang it. So yes, I spent my focus was on teaching kids. When I came to the U.S. and I moved back, and I'd been abroad for almost 25 years, I didn't have a network. So I had to rebuild my entire career, and I couldn't get myself hired as a strategic advisor because the only people who knew me remembered me from like 16 years old. So I started talking about microexpressions, and I started slowly teaching the skills that I have to other people.
Okay, so let's help my pricing audience, if you don't mind.
Yes.
What? Let's assume I'm in a negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I'm going to be watching for pupils because I want to see when they get excited.
Yes.
And I can try to close the deal, or I can raise my price, or
right.
emphasize that capability or feature. What other emotion might I expect to see, and what should I do?
Disgust is constant. People show, it's one of the reasons I show it is because it's really easy to teach, but also you see it all day long everywhere. And it's coded as disgust. It's really discomfort. That makes me uncomfortable, or it's just that I don't want to. So let's simplify it and just call it the no face. So somebody does this, you say, okay, so I want to get this project started in 2 weeks. That person does not want to get that started in 2 weeks. There's something about what you just said that they're saying no. And if you keep talking and you sort of pass through that, you've already got that person in a negative, towards a negative trajectory. Mm. So you have the choice of pulling back and saying, okay, is there a better timeline, or does that work for you? I mean, just asking, just knowing when to ask further questions and stop. It's one of the things that goes wrong in any interpersonal. I was in a high level negotiation on my own behalf with a client that I knew well recently. And he just kept talking at me. And there was at no point did he say, does this work for you? And I just looked at him and I was thinking, he's on autopilot. I mean, this is not how he's ever talked to me in any situation before. And I thought this, I was showing no, 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 and no, and no. And he wasn't picking up on it. And it became very problematic. So that's a no.
I think I was having one of those Zoom calls yesterday. I had about 5 people on, mm-hmm. and one person had a permanent no face on.
Yep.
And it was about halfway through, we finally got her to switch to having a real conversation. But it was fascinating.
Yeah.
And I wish I had a recording of it so I can go back and look at her face now.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and if you see it, you have a choice to make. I mean, it's not always that so for example, if I see grief, or sadness, which is that puckering of the chin, I can't always, if I'm seeing it in one of my employees, I might not stop in the middle of the meeting and say, hey, what's going on? Or there are times where you've got 5 people in front of you, just like you said, and it may be a casual enough meeting so that you can address the individual, or maybe a board meeting or really high level meeting where you make a note to self and then you talk to that individual. You think, this is a person I need to grab coffee with. I need to have a private conversation with this person to get them on the board so that we can move forward so this person's not impeding our progress with the group. So there's all sorts of strategic decisions you can make, especially when we're talking about pricing for a longer project, or you're trying to extend a project and have a long-term relationship. But even in the short, quick, knowing that that's a no, that they didn't like what you just said, allows you to pivot or reframe. Oh, here's another one that's really good. The double lip pull, which looks like, if we're thinking of animation, we're taking the cartoons that we used to watch as children, the frown. It's not really a frown because it has nothing to do with sadness, but watch me do this. It's a very French, like, je sais pas, je ne sais pas. Like, I don't know. It's the I don't know face. And I was taught that it was disbelief. It's not. I make that face all the time. And what it means is, I'll have to think about that. So if you're in the middle of trying to talk to somebody about value and they go, and they do that double lip pull, that's them saying, I'm not convinced. So you have more work to do before you want to try to close that deal. You have more explaining to do, more convincing to do.
Oh, that's fascinating. I have to watch for that face now.
Yeah.
So when you made the face, I don't know if you ever watched the TV show, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel.
I haven't, but I've seen it's on Netflix, right? Is it good?
Yes.
Okay.
It's actually on Prime Video.
Oh, okay, Prime. Okay.
It's amazing. And it just reminds me of her mother when you make that face. So she must make that face a lot.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's really interesting that we're picking up on this all the time, but it's like anything else that we don't have a vocabulary for. It's like our thoughts don't get all the way to the finish line. Right? If you're learning, if you have a little kid and they kind of understand a big pile of Legos is more than a little pile of Legos, or a giant donut or pile of donuts is more than a small pile of donuts, but they may not know how to count. Once they can start to count, they really can quantify and say, okay, but this is different in this way. And you can make all these more sophisticated arguments. And so once people have a vocabulary for the stuff that they see all the time, they then can have a much higher level conversation. It's one of the reasons I love training teams, because they'll say, did you see that when we said 12 million for this project, her pupils dilated and he showed disbelief, or he showed no. And then you can talk and they say, no, I missed that. Or yeah, I saw that. Oh my God, that's why I pivoted and started talking about this. And so when you see pupil dilation, you can increase price and scope. And if you have everybody on your team, if you're a 2-person team or more that's working together to do an M&A, you're aligned and you're going, okay, well now, maybe we're going to make this product, maybe we're going to make it bigger than we had previously planned on. Just gives you, it's like having X-ray vision. It's fun.
Okay. I'm actually just going to, one thing I often say to people is that I can teach you how to read minds, but I do it in a very different way.
Right.
And I do it as in I help people know what does value mean to a customer and what are you looking for in that respect?
Yeah.
And you're essentially saying, what emotions are you going to see?
I can read feelings. I can't read minds. I can read feelings. So if we're like the Wonder Twin powers activate, we got it all covered, baby. There's nothing we can't do.
Okay, I could have this conversation all day, but we're going to have to wrap this up.
Okay.
But you have to. I told you I was going to ask you this question.
Yeah.
What's the one piece of pricing advice you would give our listeners that you think could have a big impact on their business?
To go in with a set plan and a set price, but be willing to pivot and adjust according to the information and the feedback you're getting. And then I would also say, don't feel rushed to reach completion and to end. And, if you feel like you need to process more and you need to think about things more, you don't need to close the deal in that instant. You can always say, okay, well, I've gotten a lot to think about. Let me go get back to you. I think people just are so rushed to get everything closed immediately that they sometimes don't use all the information that's available to them to make good choices.
Yeah, I think those are two really good pieces of advice. And the second one I'll tag team on. And when we're negotiating, patience wins.
Yes.
It doesn't hurt to walk away and say, I'm going to go think about this and then come back later. So,
yes.
Annie, thank you so much for your time today. If anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
Thanks, Mark. I've loved it. LinkedIn is probably the easiest. Just direct message me on LinkedIn.
Okay. And we'll have her LinkedIn URL in the show notes.
Perfect.
Episode 198 is all done. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, would you please leave us a rating and a review? The easiest way is to go to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing. I have no idea why companies make it hard to rate podcasts, but go to ratethispodcast.com/impact pricing and you'll figure it out. And finally, if you have any questions or comments about the podcast or pricing in general, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact. Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.